The handcuffs would come out in less than 3 minutes. They would click shut around her wrists with a sound that echoed across the crowded sidewalk, drawing phones from pockets and gasps from strangers. They would bite into her skin, tightened deliberately by hands that had done this before, hands that enjoyed the power of the moment, but that was still 3 minutes away. Right now, on this ordinary Friday afternoon in late November, the downtown shopping district hummed with the comfortable chaos of the holiday season. Shoppers moved between storefronts decorated with twinkling lights. Children tugged at parents' hands, pointing at window displays. The smell of roasted chestnuts drifted from a street vendor cart, mixing with the crisp autumn air. And in the middle of it all, a woman in a tailored charcoal coat stepped out of Morrison Grocery with a paper bag in her arms. She was 52 years old, with close-cropped silver-streaked hair and the kind of posture that spoke of decades of discipline. Her coat was expensive but understated. Her shoes practical. Her only jewelry a simple watch with a worn leather band. She moved with purpose but not urgency, pausing briefly to let a young mother with a stroller pass before continuing toward the ATM at the corner. To anyone watching, she looked like exactly what she appeared to be, a professional woman running errands on her afternoon off, perhaps a lawyer, perhaps an executive, perhaps simply someone who had done well enough in life to afford nice things and the time to enjoy them. 50 yards away, in the patrol car idling near the intersection, Officer Ryan Garrett saw something very different. Garrett was 34 years old, with a military-style haircut and the thick build of a man who spent his off hours in the gym rather than with his family. 8 years on the force had taught him to trust his instincts, to see patterns that others missed, to identify threats before they materialized. At least, that is what he told himself. What he had actually learned was something darker. How to recognize people who did not fit, who did not belong, who could be questioned and detained without consequence. His eyes tracked the woman as she approached the ATM. Expensive coat, confident walk, large cash deposit visible in her hands. Something did not add up. "Look at that," he said to his partner Kevin Marsh, nodding toward the corner. "Who carries that much cash these days?" Marsh, younger at 29 and less certain of his instincts, followed Garrett's gaze. He saw a woman at an ATM. Nothing more. "Maybe she runs a cash business," he offered. "Maybe," Garrett's jaw tightened. "Or maybe she is washing dirty money. Counterfeiting. Something does not feel right." He threw the cruiser into drive before Marsh could respond. What Garrett did not see, could not see, because his assumptions had already blinded him, was the truth of who stood at that ATM. He did not see the woman who had spent 28 years in federal law enforcement, rising from field agent to the highest position in the Department of Homeland Security. He did not see the first black woman ever confirmed to that role, her nomination approved by the Senate after months of grueling hearings. He did not see the official who commanded 40,000 employees, oversaw a $60 billion budget, and reported directly to the President of the United States. He saw a black woman with too much money in a neighborhood where, in his mind, she did not belong, and that was enough. One stop, one assumption, one lie to dispatch, and a career built on abusing the powerless was about to burn to ash in spectacular public fashion. But first, we need to understand how the Director of Homeland Security ended up buying groceries like a normal person on a Friday afternoon. Denise Mitchell had earned this afternoon 28 years of service. Countless investigations closed, trafficking rings dismantled, terrorist plots disrupted, corrupt officials exposed and prosecuted. She had given her career everything she had, and it had cost her everything she might have had instead. A marriage that could not survive the constant relocations, the midnight phone calls, the secrets she could never share, a daughter who grew up with an absent mother and now, at 26, kept her at a polite distance, birthday cards, occasional texts, the surface relationship of people who shared blood but not history, an apartment that felt more like a hotel room than a home, furnished with the generic efficiency of someone who never expected to stay long enough to make it personal. But the job had saved her too. It had given her purpose when grief threatened to swallow her whole. First her father's death when she was 30, then her mother long decline into dementia. Then the divorce that felt like failure, even though everyone told her it was not. The job had surrounded her with people who understood sacrifice, who had given up normal lives for the same reason she had, because someone had to stand in the gap between chaos and order. And now at 52, she commanded it all. Director of the Department of Homeland Security. Senate confirmed 18 months ago, after hearings that had dragged every detail of her life into public view, her financial records, her past relationships. That one time in 1994 when she had been pulled over for a broken taillight and the officer had demanded to search her car without cause. She had cited her rights then, as a 24-year-old field agent just 2 years into her career. And the memory had surfaced during her confirmation as evidence that she had a history of confrontational behavior toward law enforcement. She had been confirmed anyway, 72 to 28. Not unanimous, but decisive. And today, for the first time in months, she had taken a half day. No briefings, no secure calls, no motorcade, just Denise Mitchell, private citizen, buying groceries at the same store where she had shopped for 3 years, depositing cash at the same ATM she had used a dozen times before. Her security detail had offered to accompany her. She had declined. This was her neighborhood, her routine, her few hours of normalcy in a life that had very little of it. She needed to remember what it felt like to be ordinary. What she had not anticipated was how quickly ordinary could turn dangerous. She heard the patrol car before she saw it. 28 years of law enforcement had given her an unshakable sixth sense for the approach of authority. The distinctive rumble of the engine, the subtle change in ambient sound as civilians unconsciously moved aside, the way the air seemed to tighten just before a uniform appeared. She finished entering her PIN, waited for the machine to process her deposit, and did not turn around. She already knew what was coming. She had been in law enforcement long enough to recognize the preliminary movements of a pretextual stop, the cruiser positioning itself at an angle, the engine idling while officers assessed their target, the decision being made before any evidence of wrongdoing existed. Denise exhaled slowly, a sound that came from somewhere deep and tired. She was 52 years old. She had risen higher than almost anyone in her field. She commanded an agency with investigative authority over everything from border security to cybercrime to presidential protection. And none of it would protect her right now. Because to the officers in that patrol car, she was not Director Mitchell. She was just a black woman who did not belong. Ryan Garrett had wanted to be a cop since he was 15 years old. Not for noble reasons, not because of a calling to serve or a family tradition of sacrifice. Ryan Garrett had wanted to be a cop because he had grown up poor in a neighborhood where cops were the only people who seemed to have any power, and he had wanted that power for himself. The badge meant authority, the gun meant respect. The uniform meant that people who had once looked through him would now look up to him with fear in their eyes. He had gotten everything he wanted. 8 years on the force, commendations for proactive policing, a reputation among his colleagues as a hard charger who was not afraid to make stops that other officers might hesitate to make, a wife who tolerated his long hours, 2 kids he saw on weekends when the schedule allowed. What the commendations did not mention were the complaints, 4 of them in 8 years, all involving minorities, all dismissed for insufficient evidence by internal affairs units that were understaffed, underfunded, and institutionally resistant to finding fault with their own. The pattern was clear to anyone who cared to look. Jamal Crawford, 16 years old, held face down on hot asphalt for 14 minutes because he matched the description of a robbery suspect. The description had been black male, medium height, dark clothing. Jamal had been walking home from basketball practice in his school uniform. The complaint was dismissed. Jamal's parents could not afford a lawyer. Elena Vasquez, 43 years old, a Latina store owner whose car was searched in front of her regular customers because Garrett claimed to smell marijuana. He found nothing. The complaint was dismissed. Elena lost 3 regulars who never came back. Curtis Bell, 67 years old, a Vietnam veteran who was detained for suspicious behavior while waiting for a bus. The suspicious behavior was standing on a public sidewalk while black. Curtis died 6 months later. Unrelated causes, his family said, though they believed the stress had accelerated his decline. The complaint died with him. And now there was a 4th complaint pending, filed just 3 months ago by a young black professional who had been pulled over for a broken taillight that was not actually broken. That complaint was under review, which meant it would sit in a file until everyone forgot about it. 4 complaints, 4 dismissals, 4 victims who learned the same lesson. The system would protect Officer Ryan Garrett no matter what he did. His most recent supervisor had warned him twice about community relations issues. Garrett had nodded and smiled and interpreted the warnings as evidence that his supervisors were weak, afraid to support real police work because of politics and public pressure. He knew better. He understood that crime did not happen in neat, politically correct categories. He understood that certain people were more likely to cause problems than others. He understood that proactive policing meant making stops based on patterns. And the patterns he saw all pointed in the same direction. Now, watching the black woman at the ATM deposit what looked like several $1,000s in cash, Garrett felt the familiar electric anticipation that preceded a stop. "Let us check it out," he said to Marsh, already reaching for the door handle. Marsh hesitated. "Ryan, she is just using the ATM. Large cash transaction. No visible income source that matches. She does not fit the neighborhood. What does that mean?" Garrett shot him a look that ended the conversation. After 2 years riding together, Marsh knew when to push back and when to follow. This was a following moment. The patrol car pulled to the curb. Garrett stepped out into the cold afternoon air, adjusting his duty belt with the practiced ease of a man who had done this hundreds of times before. This would be easy. This would be routine. This would be just another stop that went exactly the way he expected. He had never been more wrong about anything in his life. Denise felt the officer footsteps approaching across the concrete. Heavy, deliberate, the stride of a man who wanted his presence announced. She collected her ATM receipt, folded it neatly, and placed it in her coat pocket. She did not turn around. She kept her movements slow and visible, her hands in plain sight at all times. 28 years of training. 28 years of understanding exactly how quickly these encounters could turn fatal. "Excuse me, ma'am." The voice was sharp, performative, pitched loud enough for nearby pedestrians to hear. Denise turned slowly, her expression neutral, and faced the officer for the first time. He was younger than she expected, mid-30s, with the thick neck and rigid posture of a man who thought physical presence was the same as authority. His hand rested near his sidearm, not on it, not yet, but close enough to send a message. His partner lingered a few steps behind, younger, less certain, eyes moving nervously between his colleague and the gathering attention. Denise noted the badge numbers automatically. Garrett 7241, Marsh 8856. Old habits. Can I help you, officer? She asked, keeping her voice low and even. Garrett's eyes moved over her, assessing. The expensive coat, the professional bearing, the calm that did not match the situation he expected. We received a report of suspicious activity at this ATM, he said. I need to see some identification. It was a lie. Denise knew it was a lie. There had been no report, no call, no suspicious activity beyond the simple fact of her existence in this location. What specific suspicious activity? She asked. Garrett's jaw tightened. This was not the response he expected. He expected stammering, fear, immediate compliance. I am not going to ask again. I'm not refusing to cooperate, officer. I'm asking you to explain the legal basis for this stop. What specific behavior have I engaged in that constitutes reasonable suspicion? Behind them, Denise noticed movement. An elderly white woman had emerged from the bakery across the street and was watching the encounter with obvious concern. After a moment, she raised her phone and began recording. Good, Denise thought. Witnesses. 2 more phones appeared in the gathering crowd. A young man with a messenger bag. A woman in business attire who had paused mid-stride on her way to somewhere else. The documentation was building. Garrett noticed the phones too. And something shifted in his posture. Not backing down. Doubling down. The audience made him more aggressive, not less. The amount of cash you just deposited is suspicious, he said, his voice carrying deliberately across the sidewalk. I have reason to believe it may be counterfeit or proceeds from illegal activity. You watch me deposit my own money into my own bank account. That is not a crime. You are refusing to cooperate with a lawful order. I am asking you to identify the legal basis for detaining me. That is not refusal. That is my constitutional right. The words hung in the cold air between them. Garrett's partner Marsh shifted uncomfortably. Something about this was not right. The woman calm, her knowledge of procedure, the way she met their eyes without a trace of the fear that usually accompanied these stops. But Garrett was past the point of retreat. His ego had taken the wheel, and it was not letting go. Turn around, he ordered. Hands behind your back. Denise did not move. Am I under arrest? You are being detained for investigation. Under what specific statute? I am not going to tell you again. Badge number 7241, Denise said, loud enough for every recording phone to capture. For the record, I am complying under duress with what I believe to be an unlawful detention. I have committed no crime. I have provided no basis for reasonable suspicion. I am being detained solely because of this officer's assumptions about my appearance. And then, because she understood that resistance could be fatal, she turned around slowly and placed her hands behind her back. The handcuffs clicked shut. The crowd murmuring grew louder. And 3 blocks away, unnoticed by anyone on that sidewalk, a black SUV turned onto the street and began moving toward the intersection with quiet, deliberate purpose. The handcuffs were too tight. Denise felt them bite into the thin skin of her wrists, metal edges pressing against bone. It was deliberate. She had been around law enforcement long enough to know the difference between secure restraints and punitive ones. Garrett had added that extra quarter turn on purpose. You are making a mistake, she said quietly. Garrett laughed, a short dismissive sound. They all say that. He gripped her arm and turned her to face him, his eyes moving over her with the predatory assessment of someone categorizing their prey. Now let us start over. What is your name? Denise Mitchell. And what were you doing at that ATM, Mitchell? Depositing money into my bank account from my job. What kind of job pays in cash? Denise met his eyes steadily. I was not paid in cash. I withdrew money earlier this week for personal expenses and did not spend it all. I was depositing the remainder. Garrett smirked. That is convenient. It is the truth. The truth is that honest people do not carry around thousands of dollars in cash. The truth is that people who use ATMs in this neighborhood do not usually look like you. The truth is that I have been doing this job for 8 years, and I know when something does not add up. Behind him, Marsh shifted his weight from foot to foot. The younger officer discomfort was visible, the tightness in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept darting to the growing crowd. Ryan, he said quietly, maybe we should just run her ID. When I need your opinion, I will ask for it. Garrett did not even turn around. His attention remained fixed on Denise with the single-minded focus of a man who had decided on his narrative and would not be moved from it. On the sidewalk, the crowd had grown to perhaps 15 people. More phones were recording. The elderly woman from the bakery, Patricia Holloway, though Denise would not learn her name until later, had moved closer. Her phone held steady, her face tight with concern. This is not right, Patricia called out. She did not do anything. Garrett spun toward the voice. Mom, step back or you will be detained for interfering with police activity. I'm on a public sidewalk. Step back. Patricia retreated a few feet but kept recording. Denise caught her eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Keep the camera rolling. Keep documenting. Because documentation might be the only thing that made a difference. Garrett partner approached with Denise's purse, which he had retrieved from where it had fallen during the handcuffing. I need to search this, Garrett announced. More to the crowd than to Denise. Do you have a warrant? Denise asked. I have probable cause. Based on what specific facts? Garrett ignored her, unzipping the purse and rifling through its contents with deliberate roughness. He pulled out her wallet, flipped it open. Barely glanced at the driver license before tossing the wallet back into the bag. Then he found the cash. $347, folded neatly in an envelope. The remainder of a cash withdrawal she had made 4 days ago for a furniture delivery that had been rescheduled. Garrett held the bills up like a trophy. And what do we have here? His voice carried across the sidewalk. Theatrical and accusing. Looks like a lot of cash for someone who claims to be just running errands. That is my money, legally obtained. I have bank records. Sure you do. He flipped through the bills, examining them with exaggerated care. Funny thing about counterfeit money. It looks exactly like the real thing until you check it properly. Denise understood what he was doing. He was building a narrative, constructing a justification for the detention that would hold up later. It did not matter that he had no actual evidence of counterfeiting. It did not matter that the cash was perfectly legitimate. What mattered was creating enough doubt, enough paperwork, enough procedural cover to make this stop seem reasonable after the fact. She had seen this exact technique used throughout her career. She had trained agents to recognize it. She had testified about it before congressional committees, and now she was experiencing it firsthand. I am going to radio this in, Garrett announced. You are coming with us while we verify these bills. You are arresting me for possessing my own money. I am detaining you pending investigation of suspected counterfeiting. The word counterfeiting landed like a bomb in the crowd. Denise could feel the shift. Some people stepping back, distancing themselves from someone who might be a criminal. Others moving closer, sensing that something unjust was happening and wanting to document it. Marsh had found something in Denise's coat pocket. He pulled it out. A black leather credentials case, and started to open it. Garrett snatched it from his hands before he could look inside. Give me that. He glanced at the case briefly, dismissively, and tossed it back into her purse. Probably fake anyway. We will check it at the station. Denise's heart rate, which she had kept carefully controlled throughout the encounter, jumped slightly. He had just dismissed her federal credentials without looking at them. Her photo ID, her badge, her director-level clearance, thrown into a purse like it meant nothing. Because to him, it did mean nothing. To him, she was just another suspect. Just another case. Just another black woman who did not belong where she was found. And in that moment, Denise understood something with terrible clarity. This was not about her. This was not about justice or law enforcement or protecting the public. This was about power. This was about a man who had learned he could do whatever he wanted and the system would protect him. And he was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. Garrett keyed his shoulder radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I have a suspect in custody at the corner of Madison and 5th. Black female, 50s, detained for investigation of counterfeiting. She is being uncooperative and confrontational, requesting backup for transport. Denise listened to every word. Uncooperative. She had answered every question. Confrontational. She had not raised her voice once. Each lie was documented on his body camera. Each fabrication would be preserved in the dispatch records. He was building a case that did not exist. Constructing a story from assumptions and prejudice. And the system, she knew from experience, would likely believe him. You are making false statements, she said, quite enough that only Garrett could hear. Every word you just said to dispatch is contradicted by your own body camera footage. Garrett leaned close, his voice dropping to a whisper. Body camera footage can be lost, corrupted, accidentally deleted. He smiled, a cold, confident expression. It happens all the time. The threat was unmistakable, but what Garrett did not know, could not know, was that Denise Mitchell had spent 3 years implementing federal guidelines for body camera retention, specifically because of officers like him. She had testified before Congress about evidence tampering. She had overseen prosecutions of officers who destroyed footage, and she knew that his department cameras uploaded automatically to cloud storage every 30 seconds. Nothing could be deleted without leaving a trace. But she did not tell him that. Not yet. Instead, she turned her attention to Marsh, who was standing a few feet away with visible discomfort. Officer Marsh, she said. Badge number 8856. For the record, are you aware that your partner just threatened to destroy evidence? Marsh's eyes widened. He looked at Garrett, then back at Denise, caught between loyalty and self-preservation. I did not hear anything, he said. But his voice cracked on the words, yes, you did. And so did every phone currently recording this conversation. She watched the realization land. The sudden understanding that whatever Garrett had promised him about how these stops worked, the rules had just changed. Garrett grabbed her arm, fingers digging into her bicep hard enough to leave bruises. Let us go, he said. pulling her toward the patrol car. "You can play lawyer at the station." The crowd parted reluctantly as they moved through. Patricia Holloway stepped forward, her phone still recording. "I'm getting your badge numbers," she called out. "I'm going to report this. Report all you want, ma'am." Garrett replied without breaking stride. "Have a nice day." He opened the back door of the patrol car and guided Denise inside with a push that was just slightly too hard to be professional. She settled into the hard plastic seat, her hands cramped behind her back, and looked out through the window at the gathered crowd. 15 people at least. A dozen phones, witnesses who had seen everything. Documented everything. It would not be enough to stop what was happening, but it would be more than enough to prove what happened after. The patrol car smelled of disinfectant and old fear. Denise had sat in the back of countless vehicles like this throughout her career. Though usually on the other side of the situation, she knew the dimensions, the hard edges, the way the space seemed to shrink around you until breathing required conscious effort. She kept her breathing steady, counted her heartbeats, waited. Up front, Garrett slid into the driver's seat while Marsh took the passenger side. The younger officer immediately pulled out his notepad, avoiding eye contact with either of them. "Unit 7 to dispatch," Garrett reported. "Suspect is secured. Transporting to Central for processing." "Copy that, Unit 7. What are the charges?" "Counterfeiting, possibly fraud. She has got a stack of cash and no good explanation for it. Every word a lie. Every word recorded." Denise leaned forward slightly, positioning herself so her face was visible through the gap in the protective barrier. "For the record," she said, her voice clear and carrying. "I have not been read my Miranda rights despite being told I'm under arrest. I have not been informed of specific charges. My credentials were seized and dismissed without examination. Every statement Officer Garrett has made to dispatch mischaracterizes my behavior and the nature of this encounter." Garrett adjusted his rearview mirror, meeting her eyes. "You watch a lot of cop shows, do you not?" "I have spent 28 years in law enforcement." He laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Sure you have. And I am the chief of police." "No," Denise said quietly. "You're about 8 levels below that." Something in her tone made Garrett pause. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across his features, but his ego reasserted itself almost immediately. "Save it for your lawyer," he said. "You are going to need one." He pulled the patrol car away from the curb. Through the rear window, Denise watched the crowd dispersing, phones lowering, people returning to their ordinary afternoons. Patricia Holloway still stood on the sidewalk, her phone tracking the vehicle until it turned the corner. And 2 blocks behind them, unnoticed by either officer, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled into traffic and began following at a discreet distance. Denise had not called anyone, had not signaled anyone, had not pressed any emergency beacon or spoken any code word. But 28 years in federal law enforcement meant 28 years of protocols, 28 years of systems designed to track and protect high-value personnel, 28 years of redundancies that kicked in automatically when something went wrong. Her phone, still in her purse, had a location chip that pinged her security detail every 60 seconds. When she did not return to her car within the expected window, they would check the feed. When they saw patrol lights on the street corner where she should have been, they would mobilize. They were already mobilizing. And Officer Ryan Garrett, still confident in the narrative he had constructed, had no idea that the most catastrophic mistake of his life was already unfolding around him. The intersection ahead showed red. Garrett brought the patrol car to a stop, drumming his fingers impatiently on the steering wheel. Beside him, Marsh stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, his notepad untouched in his lap, the silence stretched, thick with tension that neither officer wanted to acknowledge. In the back seat, Denise shifted slightly, easing the pressure on her wrists. The cuffs had numbed her fingers, pins and needles shooting up her forearms with every small movement. "You should have listened to your partner," she said. Garrett's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. "What? When he suggested running my ID, you should have listened. Your ID is fake. We both know it. You do not know anything. That is the problem." The light turned green. Garrett accelerated harder than necessary, the car lurching forward. Through the side window, Denise caught movement. A black SUV turning onto the street behind them. Tinted windows, government plates, moving with the deliberate calm of a vehicle that had somewhere specific to be. She recognized the model. She should. She had approved the fleet purchase 2 years ago. "We are being followed," Marsh said suddenly, his voice tight. Garrett checked his mirror. "It is just traffic." "No, it has been behind us since Madison. Same distance, same speed. Relax. It is probably just some soccer mom late for pickup." But Denise noticed the slight tremor in Garrett's voice, noticed the way his grip tightened on the steering wheel, noticed the first crack in his certainty. "Good, Officer Garrett," she said. "I'm going to tell you something and I need you to listen carefully. I do not need to listen to anything. You have about 3 minutes to make a choice. You can continue on your current course, in which case your career will end today and you will face federal prosecution. Or you can stop this vehicle right now, remove these handcuffs and begin documenting what actually happened, in which case there may be a path forward that does not involve prison." The car fell silent. Marsh had turned halfway around in his seat, staring at Denise with an expression that hovered between fear and curiosity. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before Denise could answer, Garrett let out a harsh laugh. "Nice try. You almost had me going there." He shook his head, but his laughter sounded forced. "Hollow. What are you, some kind of lawyer? Public defender?" "No." "Then save the threats for someone who is impressed." The SUV behind them had closed the distance slightly. Still not aggressive, still not signaling, just present, waiting. Denise leaned back against the hard plastic seat. "I tried to give you a choice," she said quietly. "Remember that." Garrett pulled into the parking lot of the nearest precinct with more speed than was strictly necessary, tires chirping slightly on the asphalt. He wanted to get this woman processed, documented, and out of his hair before anything else went wrong. But as he stepped out of the car, he noticed something unusual. Another patrol vehicle had pulled into the lot behind him. Sergeant Thomas Bradley Carr, his shift supervisor. Bradley was a 22-year veteran, a careful man who had survived 2 decades on the force by reading situations accurately and staying out of trouble. He did not make unannounced visits to routine bookings. "Garrett," Bradley called out, approaching with long, purposeful strides. "Hold up a minute." Garrett straightened, suddenly conscious of the eyes on him. "Sarge, what is going on? Got a call from dispatch. Something about your stop is not sitting right. Tell me what happened." "Standard stop. Suspicious activity at an ATM. Large cash transaction. Woman would not explain herself. Got confrontational. That is not what the witnesses are saying." Garrett blinked. "What witnesses? The ones who have been calling the department for the last 10 minutes. The ones whose videos are already being shared on social media?" Bradley's voice was tight. "What exactly did you do, Garrett?" "I did my job. Then you will not mind if I speak to the suspect myself." Before Garrett could protest, Bradley moved past him toward the back door of the patrol car. He opened it, looked inside at the woman seated there with her hands cuffed behind her back, and paused. Something about her bearing caught him. The calm, the directness of her gaze, the way she met his eyes without a trace of fear or desperation. "Ma, am Sergeant Thomas Bradley. I understand there has been some confusion about this stop. Can you tell me what happened?" "Your officer detained me without cause, made false statements to dispatch, and is currently claiming I am involved in counterfeiting despite having no evidence. My identification is in my purse. I suggest you look at it." Bradley turned to Marsh, who was hovering nearby with the purse still in his hands. "Give me that." Marsh handed it over. Bradley opened it, found the wallet, found the black credentials case that Garrett had dismissed without a glance. He opened it and stopped breathing. The credentials were unmistakable. Photo ID with federal seal, badge, official documentation that could not be forged, could not be faked, could not be explained away. Director, Department of Homeland Security. Bradley read the name, read the title, read it again as if the words might change. Then he looked at the woman in the back seat with an expression that had completely transformed from professional skepticism to something approaching horror. "Oh my God," he whispered. Garrett saw the color drain from his supervisor's face. "Sarge, what is it?" Bradley did not answer immediately. He stood frozen, the credentials case open in his hands, staring at what he had found as if willing it to be something other than what it obviously was. Then he stepped back from the car and turned to face Garrett with an expression the younger officer had never seen before. "Remove the handcuffs," Bradley said. "Right now." "What?" "Sarge, she's a suspect." "Remove the goddamn handcuffs, Garrett." The words cracked like a whip across the parking lot. Marsh actually flinched. Garrett hesitated, his mind racing. This was not how things were supposed to go. This was not how the script worked. He had done this before, dozens of times, and it always ended the same way. The suspect got processed, the paperwork got filed, the system moved on. Why was Bradley looking at him like that? "I said now, officer." Something in Bradley's voice finally penetrated Garrett's resistance. He moved to the back of the patrol car, pulled out his key, and unlocked the handcuffs with hands that had begun to tremble slightly. Denise brought her arms forward slowly, massaging circulation back into her wrists. Deep red marks showed where the metal had bitten into her skin. The bruising would be visible for days. She stepped out of the vehicle with the same calm dignity she had maintained throughout the encounter. Not rushing, not celebrating, simply taking her proper place in a situation that was about to change completely. Bradley approached her, his posture suddenly uncertain, almost deferential. "Director Mitchell, I apologize. I had no idea." "Sergeant Bradley," her voice was cool. "Professional. I need you to preserve all body camera footage from this encounter. All dash cam recordings, all dispatch communications. This is now a federal matter." Bradley nodded rapidly. "Of course. Absolutely, I will make sure. And Sergeant, yes ma'am, this is not about me. If I had been just some woman buying groceries. If I had not had these credentials, your officer would have arrested me and processed me and the system would have protected him. Again." Bradley's face tightened. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" "Yes ma'am, I do." Garrett stood frozen a few feet away, watching his career collapse in real time. His mind kept trying to process what was happening, kept trying to find the angle, the explanation, the way out. Director of Homeland Security. He had just handcuffed the Director of Homeland Security. He had called her confrontational on an open radio channel. He had threatened to destroy evidence. The magnitude of it crashed over him like a wave, drowning whatever confidence he had left. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." And then, as if the universe had decided his humiliation was not yet complete, 3 black SUVs turned into the precinct parking lot in perfect formation. The SUV stopped in a precise line, engines idling in unison. For a moment, nothing happened. The parking lot held its breath. Then all 3 vehicles opened simultaneously, and 8 people emerged with the coordinated efficiency of a military operation. They wore suits, dark and professional, but their bearing was unmistakably tactical. Earpieces, subtle weapon bulges under jackets, the kind of physical readiness that comes from training and experience rather than gym memberships. The lead figure was a tall black man in his late 40s, with silver at his temples and an authority in his stride that matched the woman he was approaching. Director Mitchell. His voice carried clearly across the lot. "We tracked your location when you missed the pickup window. Are you injured?" "Bruised wrists, nothing serious." Denise held up her hands, showing the marks from the handcuffs. "We are going to need photographs of these for the record." "Yes, ma, I am." The man's eyes moved to Garrett, and something in his gaze made the officer step backward involuntarily. "This is Deputy Director Marcus Cole," Denise said, loud enough for everyone present to hear. "My second in command at the Department of Homeland Security. These are federal agents under my authority." Garrett's legs actually wobbled. Deputy Director, federal agents, Department of Homeland Security. Each word was a hammer blow to his sense of reality. Bradley stepped forward, positioning himself between his officer and the federal agents in what might have been a protective gesture if there had been any protection left to offer. "Sir, I am Sergeant Thomas Bradley. I want to assure you that we are fully cooperating with whatever." "Sergeant," Cole's voice was ice. "At this moment, I'm not interested in assurances. I'm interested in facts." He turned slightly, addressing one of the agents behind him. "Secure all recording devices from the officers involved. Body cameras, dash cams, personal phones, everything." "You cannot do that," Garrett blurted out. "Those are department property. Federal investigation supersedes department property rights in cases involving civil rights violations." Cole did not even look at him as he spoke. "You should know that, officer. It is basic law enforcement procedure." The agents moved with quiet efficiency, collecting devices with the practiced ease of people who had done this many times before. Garrett watched his body camera being sealed in an evidence bag and felt the last vestiges of his control slipping away. Everything he had done, everything he had said, everything he had threatened, preserved forever, unable to be deleted, unable to be explained away. And standing 10 feet in front of him, watching with calm, patient eyes, was the most powerful law enforcement official in the country. The woman he had slammed against a patrol car and handcuffed like a common criminal. Deputy Director Cole turned to face Garrett directly for the first time. "Officer," he checked the badge still pinned to Garrett's chest. "Officer Ryan Garrett, badge number 7241. Do you understand who you detained this afternoon?" Garrett's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I did not know. Did not know what? That she was Director of Homeland Security. That she commands every federal agent in this country, including me." Cole took a step closer. "Or did not know that black women in expensive coats have the same constitutional rights as everyone else." "I was doing my job, your job." Cole's voice dropped to a register that was somehow more frightening than shouting. "Let me tell you what your job was supposed to be, officer. You were supposed to have reasonable suspicion before making a stop. You did not. You were supposed to verify identification before making accusations. You did not. You were supposed to document honestly and accurately. You lied to dispatch about her behavior." He glanced at Denise, who gave a small nod of confirmation. "You threatened to destroy evidence. You applied restraints with deliberate force intended to cause pain. You ignored her credentials because you had already decided what she was based on what she looked like." Cole turned to address the gathering crowd of agents and officers. "This is Director Denise Mitchell, first black woman to lead the Department of Homeland Security. 28 years of service to this country. Senate confirmed with a 72-vote majority. She has more authority in her credentials case than every officer in this precinct combined." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "And Officer Garrett decided she was a counterfeiter because she had the audacity to deposit her own money while being black." The words hung in the air like a verdict already delivered. Marsh had backed away from the group entirely, pressing himself against the patrol car as if hoping to be forgotten. Bradley stood rigid, his face ashen, already calculating the damage to his own career from failing to prevent this, and Garrett. Garrett stood at the center of it all, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had done. This was not going to be another dismissed complaint. This was not going to be another file that disappeared into bureaucratic limbo. This was going to be public. This was going to be federal. This was going to follow him for the rest of his life. "I did not know," he whispered again, as if repetition could somehow save him. "That is exactly the point," Denise said quietly. "You did not know. You assumed. And because you assumed you treated me like a criminal. The question is not what you would have done differently if you had known who I was. The question is why you needed to know who I was to treat me with basic dignity. Denise turned to face the agents, her voice shifting into the register of command. Deputy Director Cole, I need formal documentation of this incident for federal records. All body camera footage from Officers Garrett and Marsh, all dispatch communications, all witness recordings that can be obtained with consent. Already in progress, ma'am. I also need to speak to the witnesses who recorded the encounter. Specifically the elderly woman from the bakery and anyone else who documented the initial stop. Cole nodded to one of the agents who immediately began making calls. And Deputy Director, yes, ma'am. I want a full background on Officer Garrett. Previous assignments, complaint history, transfer records, anything that shows a pattern. Garrett's face went from pale to grey. Pattern. The word landed like a physical blow. 4 complaints, 4 dismissals, 4 victims who had been too poor or too tired or too disillusioned to push back against a system designed to protect its own. All of it about to come into the light. Ma'am, Bradley interjected, his voice strained. I want to assure you that our department will cooperate fully with any investigation. Sergeant Bradley, Denise's attention shifted to him. You are Officer Garrett, direct supervisor. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. How many complaints has he received during his time under your supervision? Bradley hesitated. The pause was damning. I would need to check the records. 2, Denise said. 2 complaints in the 18 months he has been assigned to this precinct, both involving minorities, both dismissed. Are you aware of the complaints from his previous assignments? The silence answered for him. Did you request his full personnel file when he transferred here? His use of force history, his internal affairs record? Bradley's jaw tightened. The transfer paperwork indicated he was in good standing. The transfer paperwork was designed to make a problem disappear by moving it somewhere else. Denise's voice was patient, almost kind, which somehow made it more devastating. That is not your fault, Sergeant. It is a failure of the system. But you have the opportunity now to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Bradley nodded slowly, understanding the offer and the implicit threat contained in her words. What do you need from me, Director? Everything. Full cooperation, complete transparency, and your honest assessment of Officer Garrett's fitness for duty. For a long moment, Bradley looked at the man he had supervised for 18 months, the man he had warned about community relations, the man whose complaints he had seen dismissed and forgotten. Then he turned back to Denise. He should not be wearing a badge, Bradley said. I should have acted sooner. I did not. That is on me. Garrett's expression shifted from fear to betrayal to something that looked almost like acceptance. The walls were closing in from every direction. His partner was avoiding his eyes. His supervisor had just abandoned him. Federal agents were cataloging every mistake he had ever made. There was nowhere left to run. 30 minutes later, the precinct parking lot had transformed into something resembling a federal crime scene. Yellow tape marked the perimeter. Agents moved between vehicles with evidence bags and recording devices. A mobile command unit had arrived from the field office, bristling with communication equipment and staffed by technicians who spoke in the clipped vocabulary of people managing multiple information streams simultaneously. At the center of it all, Denise Mitchell sat on a bench near the precinct entrance, a federal medic documenting the injuries to her wrists, contusions consistent with excessive restraint pressure. The medic reported, photographing the marks from multiple angles, recommend full documentation for potential assault charges. Denise nodded, her expression neutral. The physical pain had faded to a dull throb, but the photographs would last forever. Evidence that could not be disputed, could not be dismissed, could not be swept under a rug. Deputy Director Cole approached with a tablet in his hands. Ma'am, we have pulled Officer Garrett personnel file. You are going to want to see this. She took the tablet, scrolling through the documentation with the practiced efficiency of someone who had reviewed thousands of such files throughout her career. The pattern was immediate and undeniable. 8 years of service, 4 departments, 4 excessive force complaints, all involving minorities, all dismissed. Jamal Crawford, 16 years old, held face down on hot asphalt for 14 minutes for matching a description. The description was black male, medium height, dark clothing. Jamal had been wearing his school basketball uniform. Complaint dismissed. Elena Vasquez, 43 years old, Latina store owner, vehicle searched without consent, without warrant, without any contraband found. Garrett had claimed to smell marijuana. Complaint dismissed. Curtis Bell, 67 years old, black veteran, detained for suspicious behavior while waiting for a bus. Suspicious behavior, existing while black. Curtis died 6 months later. His family believed the stress accelerated his decline. Complaint died with him, and a 4th complaint still pending. A young black professional pulled over for a broken taillight that was not actually broken, under review for 3 months, which meant it would sit in a file until everyone forgot about it. Denise scrolled back to the beginning and read it all again. These people, she said quietly. These names, they were me today. The only difference is that I had credentials and connections and resources they did not have. Yes, ma'am. Any one of them could be dead right now. Garrett could have escalated, could have drawn his weapon, could have claimed he felt threatened and fired. Cole said nothing. There was nothing to say. They both knew the statistics. They both knew how often these encounters ended differently. I want to contact them, Denise said. Every victim in this file, I want them to know that what happened to them is being taken seriously. Finally, I will have the team reach out, not the team. Me, personally. She handed the tablet back. After we deal with the immediate situation. But this is not over until they know their voices mattered. The witness interviews began an hour later. Patricia Holloway, the elderly woman from the bakery, was first. She had been a school teacher for 35 years before retiring. And she approached the federal agents with the calm certainty of someone who had managed far more intimidating audiences than men in suits. I saw the whole thing, she said, her phone already unlocked and ready to share. From the moment that officer got out of his car, I knew something was wrong. The way he moved. The way he looked at her. Like she was already guilty of something. Her video was crystal clear. The approach, the demands, the handcuffing. Garrett dismissive laughter. Every word captured with damning precision. I taught for 35 years in this city, Patricia continued. Taught all kinds of kids, black, white, brown. Did not matter to me, but I saw how the world treated them differently even when they were children. I always hoped it would get better. She shook her head slowly. It has not gotten better enough. 3 other witnesses came forward with their own recordings. A young professional who had been on his lunch break, a mother who had been walking with her daughter, a delivery driver who had paused to watch. Each video showed the same thing from different angles. Each corroborated Denise's account completely. Each documented Garrett's behavior in undeniable detail. The aggregate footage was devastating. No reasonable investigator could watch it and conclude that Garrett had acted properly. No prosecutor could claim insufficient evidence. No internal affairs review could bury this in procedural delays. The evidence was overwhelming. Public and impossible to ignore. By evening, the first video had been shared on social media 10,000 times. By midnight, it would be featured on 3 national news networks. By morning, Director Mitchell would be trending across every platform. And Officer Ryan Garrett, sitting in a federal holding room with his badge and weapon already confiscated, would finally understand that the system he had trusted to protect him had no interest in protecting him anymore. Garrett's union representative arrived at 9:30 that evening. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, with the weary expression of someone who had defended police officers through countless controversies. His name was Frank Donahue, and he had been doing this job for 22 years. He had never seen anything like this. Ryan, he said, settling into a chair across from his client in the federal interview room. I need you to tell me exactly what happened. From the beginning. Leave nothing out. Garrett's eyes were red-rimmed. His earlier arrogance completely dissolved. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the fluorescent lighting and the reality of his situation. I thought she was suspicious, he said. Large cash deposit. Did not fit the neighborhood. I was doing my job. You detained the Director of Homeland Security? I did not know. You did not check her ID. It looked fake. You did not look at it at all. Your partner told the investigators you grabbed it and threw it back without opening it. Garrett's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. The body camera footage. Donahue continued, his voice flat. You threatened to destroy it, on camera, while being recorded. I was just trying to scare her. You scared her so much that she calmly documented your violations for the federal record while you were doing them. Donahue shook his head. Ryan, I have been doing this for 2 decades. I have defended officers through shootings, through beatings, through cover-ups that would make your head spin. But I have never seen someone dig their own grave this thoroughly. Garrett stared at the table. There is video from 6 witnesses. Your own body camera is evidence against you. You made false statements to dispatch that are contradicted by every piece of documentation we have, and the victim. Donahue almost laughed. The victim commands the entire federal law enforcement apparatus of the United States. What do I do? Right now? Nothing. You say nothing, you sign nothing, you admit nothing until we understand exactly what charges they are planning to file. Donahue leaned forward. But I'm going to be honest with you, Ryan. The union support has limits. This situation is beyond those limits. The optics alone. Black woman handcuffed by white cop while exercising her constitutional rights turns out to be the most powerful law enforcement official in the country. This is the kind of story that ends careers. Lots of careers. Not just yours. They can, and they will. Donahue stood, gathering his papers. I will do what I can for you. But start preparing yourself for the possibility that your time wearing a badge is over. Permanently. He left without waiting for a response. And Garrett sat alone in the interview room, surrounded by walls that seemed to press closer with every passing minute, finally understanding that there was no script, no procedure, no system that would save him from what he had done. The formal charges came down at 6 the following morning. Deputy Director Cole delivered them personally. Entering the interview room where Garrett had spent a sleepless night with a file folder that contained the end of everything. Officer Ryan Garrett, Cole began. his voice carrying the formal weight of federal authority. "You are being charged with the following offenses under federal law: deprivation of rights under color of law, Title 18, Section 242, assault under color of law, filing false official reports, conspiracy to destroy federal evidence. Each charge landed like a hammer blow. These are federal charges, which means they supersede state and local jurisdiction. You will be processed through the federal system, held without bail pending a danger assessment, and tried in federal court." Garrett's voice came out as a croak. "No bail. You threatened to destroy evidence on camera. You demonstrated a willingness to abuse your authority when you believed you could get away with it. The prosecution will argue that you pose a flight risk and a danger to potential witnesses." Cole's expression remained neutral. "The judge will decide, but I would not get your hopes up." Federal agents entered the room. The process was efficient, almost clinical. Garrett was handcuffed. The same metallic click he had inflicted on Denise less than 24 hours ago, and led out of the interview room. In the hallway, he passed Sergeant Bradley, who was waiting to be interviewed about his supervisory failures. Their eyes met briefly. Bradley looked away first. Outside the precinct, a crowd had gathered. News cameras, protesters, ordinary citizens drawn by the story that had exploded across social media overnight. They watched as Officer Ryan Garrett, once confident in his authority and protected by his badge, was loaded into the back of a federal vehicle like any other criminal. The cameras captured everything. The irony was lost on no one. The story spread faster than anyone anticipated. Within 48 hours, it had become more than a single incident. It had become a reckoning. Jamal Crawford's mother saw the video on the morning news. She recognized the pattern immediately: the aggressive approach, the dismissive laugh, the casual cruelty of power exercised without accountability. She had tried to get justice for her son 4 years ago and failed. Now she called every reporter who would listen. That officer did the same thing to my Jamal. She said in interview after interview, threw him on the ground, held him down, called him a thug when he was wearing his school uniform. And nothing happened. They told us the complaint was unfounded. They told us to move on. Elena Vasquez came forward next. The Latina store owner had never forgotten the humiliation of having her car searched in front of her regular customers. The accusations of drug possession that were never substantiated. The way Garrett had smiled at her like he was enjoying her discomfort. He called me sweetheart while he was going through my personal belongings. She told the cameras, like I was something he could toy with, like I did not matter. Curtis Bell widow Margaret released a statement through her church. Her husband had died 6 months after his encounter with Garrett, and she had always believed the stress of that day had accelerated his decline. He was a veteran, she said. Served in Vietnam, came back, raised a family, contributed to his community, and then one day he is standing at a bus stop and this officer decides he looks suspicious. My husband could not sleep right after that. Could not trust anyone in uniform. He said it reminded him of things he saw overseas. How people with power treated people without. She paused, her voice breaking. He should have been able to spend his last months in peace. Instead, he spent them looking over his shoulder. 2 more victims emerged from the publicity. Emboldened by the others' courage. A young black teacher who had been pulled over and questioned about a stolen car that was registered in his own name. An immigrant shop owner who had been threatened with deportation during a traffic stop despite being a legal permanent resident. Each story followed the same pattern. Each complaint had been dismissed. Each victim had learned the same lesson. The system would not protect them. But now, finally, someone was listening. The federal investigation expanded beyond Garrett within a week. Department of Justice attorneys, working with Denise authorization, began examining how he had managed to transfer between 4 departments while accumulating such a clear pattern of abuse. What they found was a network of bureaucratic failures, willful blindness, and institutionalized protection that stretched across jurisdictions. Each time Garrett had faced meaningful accountability, he had been quietly encouraged to seek opportunities elsewhere. His complaint history was minimized in transfer documents. His use of force records was summarized in ways that obscured the pattern. References from supervisors described him as dedicated and proactive while failing to mention the citizens he had terrorized. It was a system designed to protect its own at the expense of the public it was supposed to serve. The gypsy cop problem, investigators called it. Officers who bounced from department to department, one step ahead of accountability. Protected by unions and colleagues and supervisors who found it easier to pass problems along than to confront them. Garrett was not unique. He was typical. And that was the most damning finding of all. Denise testified before Congress 3 weeks after the incident. She sat before the cameras in a charcoal suit similar to the one she had worn that day on the street corner. Her bruised wrist long since healed, but the photograph still available in the evidence record. I want to be clear about what happened to me, she said. I was detained, handcuffed, and accused of crimes I did not commit solely because an officer looked at me and made assumptions based on my appearance. The only reason I am sitting before you today, rather than sitting in a jail cell with a manufactured criminal record, is that I happen to be someone with credentials and connections and resources. She paused, letting the silence stretch. But most people are not. Most people who experience what I experienced do not have Senate confirmation and a federal badge. They have traffic tickets and court dates and jobs they cannot miss. They have children waiting at home and bills that will not pay themselves. They do not have the luxury of fighting back. The hearing lasted 6 hours. By its end, 3 separate reform bills had been introduced, all citing the Mitchell incident as their inspiration. One would pass, one would die in committee, one would be stripped of its most important provisions and signed into law as a symbolic gesture. But the conversation had changed. The stories that had been dismissed for years were finally being heard, and Officer Ryan Garrett, sitting in federal custody awaiting trial, had become the face of everything that needed to be fixed. The department released the body camera footage under court order 4 months after the incident. By that point, the social media videos had been viewed tens of millions of times. But the body camera footage was different. It showed everything from Garrett's perspective. His approach, his assumptions, his casual cruelty rendered in high-definition detail. The footage began with his conversation with Marsh in the patrol car. "Look at that. Who carries that much cash these days? Maybe she runs a cash business. Maybe. Or maybe she is washing dirty money." The preemptive judgment. Captured forever. The assumption of guilt that preceded any investigation. Then the approach. Garrett hand near his weapon before any contact. His aggressive posture visible in the reflection of the storefront windows. "We received a report of suspicious activity at this ATM." His lie. Documented in real time. No such report had been made. "You are making a mistake." Denise' voice. Calm and measured. "They all say that." Garrett dismissive laugh. Then the handcuffing. The way he deliberately tightened the cuffs. The wince that crossed Denise's face. Quickly controlled, and the threat that would seal his fate. Body camera footage can be lost. Corrupted. Accidentally deleted. It happens all the time. Legal analysts on every network broke down the footage frame by frame. The constitutional violations, the procedural failures, the moment-by-moment documentation of abuse of power. Garrett's defense team attempted to argue context, training failures, the pressures of police work. But the footage made their arguments irrelevant. The jury would not need to interpret testimony or weigh competing narratives. They would simply watch a man who believed he was untouchable exercise his power over a woman he had prejudged as guilty. And they would watch that woman maintain her dignity throughout, calmly documenting his violations while he dug his own grave. The civil trial began before the criminal proceedings concluded. Attorneys representing Garrett's previous victims had filed a consolidated lawsuit against his former departments, arguing that the pattern of abuse should have been recognized and addressed long before it reached this point. The lawsuit sought damages, policy changes, and public acknowledgement of the harm done. Jamal Crawford testified via video link from his college dorm room. He was 19 now, studying criminal justice with plans to become a civil rights attorney. "I was 16, he said, walking home from basketball practice, wearing my school uniform, and he threw me on the ground and held me there for 14 minutes because I matched a description." He paused. "The description was black male. That is all I matched. That is all I had to match." Elena Vasquez described the long-term impact of her encounter. "I still get nervous when I see a police car," she said. "Still check my mirrors to make sure I'm not being followed. My daughter was with me that day. She was 12. She asked me why the policeman was being mean to us. I did not have an answer." Margaret Bell read a statement on behalf of her late husband. "Curtis served his country," she said, "fought for it, came home and spent 40 years being a good citizen. And then one day he is standing at a bus stop and this officer decides he does not belong there. Curtis told me that night that he finally understood why his father had been so careful around police. He said they do not protect us, they never have." The testimony continued for days, victim after victim, story after story, the accumulated weight of years of unchecked abuse. When the civil verdict came down, it totaled $14 million in damages across all plaintiffs. More importantly, the 3 departments involved were placed under federal oversight, required to implement comprehensive reforms in hiring, training, and accountability. It was not justice. Not really. No verdict could undo the trauma, could not restore the dignity that had been stripped away. But it was acknowledgement. It was proof that the stories had mattered, that the complaints had been legitimate, that the system had failed, and sometimes acknowledgement was enough. The Department of Justice consent decree was announced 8 months after the incident. 3 police departments were placed under federal supervision. Independent monitors would review their policies, examine their complaint processes, and ensure that the failures that had allowed Garrett to thrive could not happen again. Denise held a press conference to announce the agreement. "This is not about punishing individual departments," she said. "It is about ensuring that the citizens these departments serve are protected by the same constitution that protects everyone else." For too long, officers like Ryan Garrett have been able to move from department to department, one step ahead of accountability, protected by colleagues and supervisors who found it easier to pass the problem along than to confront it. She paused, her voice hardening slightly. "That ends today. Under these agreements, all officer transfers will require full disclosure of complaint histories, use of force records and internal affairs investigations, no more hiding patterns, no more pretending that a fresh start erases a troubled past. If you cannot serve the public with integrity in one jurisdiction, you will not be given the opportunity to fail the public somewhere else." The agreements were not universally welcomed. Some police unions argued that the oversight was excessive. that it would hamper legitimate law enforcement, that it unfairly punished entire departments for the actions of one officer. But the videos were too clear. The pattern was too obvious. The victim was too prominent. And for once, the system moved toward accountability rather than away from it. The federal criminal trial began 14 months after the incident. Officer Ryan Garrett sat at the defense table in a suit that no longer fit quite right. He had lost weight in federal custody, and his formerly confident posture had been replaced by something smaller, defeated. His attorney had argued for a plea deal. The prosecution had offered one: plead guilty to the civil rights violations, accept a 3-year sentence, and testify about the departmental failures that had enabled his behavior. Garrett had refused. I was doing my job, he insisted. Even after everything, I made a mistake about who she was. That is not a federal crime. So the trial proceeded. The prosecution case was surgical. They presented the body camera footage, the witness videos, the dispatch recordings, the pattern of prior complaints, the testimony of victims who had been dismissed and ignored for years. Deputy Director Cole took the stand and described the scene in the precinct parking lot. The moment when federal agents arrived. The moment when Garrett finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. Denise Mitchell herself testified for nearly 4 hours. She described the encounter methodically, without embellishment, letting the facts speak for themselves, the approach, the demands, the handcuffing, the deliberate tightening of the restraints, the threat to destroy evidence at every point. She said, I gave Officer Garrett the opportunity to correct his course. I asked for the legal basis of the stop. I identified myself as someone with law enforcement credentials. I explicitly warned him that he was making a mistake. And what was his response? The prosecutor asked. He laughed. He said, they all say that? He assumed I was lying because acknowledging the truth would have required him to admit he was wrong. The defense cross-examination attempted to establish that Denise had been confrontational, that her calm was actually hostility, that her legal knowledge was threatening. It did not go well. Mr. Garrett, Denise replied at one point. I remained seated, spoke in a calm voice, and asked questions about the legal basis for my detention. If that constitutes confrontational behavior, then every citizen who understands their constitutional rights is confrontational. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later. Judge Samuel Washington presided over a courtroom packed with observers, journalists, and victims who had traveled to witness the end of something that had affected their lives for years. Garrett stood before the bench in his orange jumpsuit, his wrists shackled, his former confidence completely erased. The judge reviewed the pre-sentencing report, the victim impact statements, the pattern of behavior that the evidence had revealed. Mr. Garrett, he said finally, you were entrusted with extraordinary authority, the power to detain, the power to search, the power to use force. In a democracy, that power comes with equally extraordinary responsibility. He paused, his gaze moving from Garrett to the crowded gallery. For 8 years, you treated that authority as a weapon rather than a trust. You targeted citizens based on their appearance. You fabricated justifications for your actions. You threatened to destroy evidence that documented your misconduct. And when the system tried to warn you through complaints, through supervisors, through the obvious distress of your victims, you ignored those warnings because you believed you were protected. Judge Washington leaned forward. You were protected. The system failed these victims long before this court had the opportunity to address their grievances. That failure does not excuse your conduct, but it does explain how someone like you was able to operate for so long without consequence. The sentence: 6 years in federal prison, permanent revocation of law enforcement certification, mandatory enrollment in the National Decertification Index, ensuring that no police department anywhere in the country could ever hire him again. Garrett received the sentence in silence. There was nothing left to say. No argument could change what the evidence had shown. No excuse could undo what the cameras had captured. He was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. The same metallic click, the same constraint, the same loss of freedom he had inflicted on others without a second thought. The gallery watched him go without comment. Justice had been delayed, but finally it had arrived. The reforms that followed the trial extended far beyond the specific departments involved. 11 states passed legislation requiring comprehensive disclosure for all police transfers. 6 more strengthened their body camera requirements, closing loopholes that had allowed footage to be delayed, edited, or accidentally lost. 23 departments voluntarily adopted the Mitchell protocols, a set of guidelines Denise had developed for de-escalation, bias recognition, and community relations. The National Decertification Index, once a voluntary database that most departments ignored, became mandatory for all law enforcement agencies receiving federal funding. Officers who had been fired for cause could no longer simply move to a neighboring jurisdiction and start fresh. The gypsy cop problem did not disappear. No single case could solve issues that had been building for generations. But the conversation had changed. The stories that had been dismissed were now evidence. The victims who had been ignored now had advocates. Denise continued in her role as Director of Homeland Security. Though the incident had changed how she approached the position, she implemented new training requirements focusing on community relations and constitutional rights. She established an internal review process for any officer conduct complaints involving allegations of discrimination. She met personally with civil rights organizations that had once viewed her agency with suspicion. I experienced what millions of Americans experience every day. She said in a speech to incoming agents, "The only difference is that I had the power to ensure consequences followed. Most people do not have that power. Your job is to ensure they do not need it. Your job is to ensure that every person you encounter, regardless of what they look like, where they live, or what assumptions your training may have instilled, receives the same constitutional protection." The speech was required viewing for all new Homeland Security personnel. The civil settlements totaled $23 million when the final numbers were calculated. Jamal Crawford received $2 million, which his mother insisted be placed in a trust for his education. He graduated 4 years later with a law degree, specializing in civil rights litigation. He often cited his encounter with Garrett as the moment he decided what he wanted to do with his life. Elena Vasquez used her settlement to relocate her business to a better location and hire additional staff. She also established a legal fund for small business owners who face discrimination from authorities. "What happened to me should not happen to anyone," she said at the fund launch. "But when it does, people should have resources to fight back." Margaret Bell donated a portion of her husband's settlement to veterans organizations. The rest she used to establish a memorial scholarship in Curtis' name, providing support for veterans returning to civilian life. "Curtis believed in service," she said. "This honors that belief." Denise personally attended the scholarship first award ceremony. She spoke briefly about accountability, about systems, about the importance of continuing to push for change even when progress seemed impossibly slow. Afterwards, she stayed to meet the scholarship recipients, 3 veterans who reminded her in different ways of the man whose death had helped inspire these changes. "He did not die because of what happened to him," Margaret Bell said to her quietly. "But he did not die at peace either. Maybe now he can rest." Denise took her hand. "I hope so. I truly hope so." 2 years later, Denise Mitchell walked through the same shopping district where it all began. The grocery store was still there. The same modest storefront with the hand-lettered signs in the window. The ATM had been replaced with a newer model, but it stood in the same location, humming quietly in the afternoon sun. The bakery where Patricia Holloway had stood recording was now a cafe. Though Patricia herself still visited regularly, Denise had seen her there just last month. Still sharp at 80, still watching the world with the same alert awareness that had led her to raise her phone that day. Denise completed her errands without incident. No suspicious glances, no patrol cars circling closer, no assumptions based on her appearance. The change was not perfect. It never would be. But it was measurable. The officers who patrolled this district had different training now. Different supervision. Different accountability structures. At the corner where she had once stood in handcuffs, there was now a small memorial plaque. The city council had installed it over the objections of the police union. A simple bronze marker that read, "Here on this corner, citizen rights were violated. Here on this corner, accountability began. May we never forget that the law must protect everyone." Denise paused to read it, though she knew the words by heart. Then she continued on her way. An ordinary woman completing ordinary errands on an ordinary afternoon. The Director of Homeland Security. Walking freely through a neighborhood that had once tried to make her a criminal. She still thought about that day sometimes. Not the fear. That had faded. Not the anger. That had transformed into action. What she thought about most was the randomness of it, the arbitrary nature of who got stopped and who did not, who faced consequences and who walked away. She had been lucky. Lucky that witnesses were recording. Lucky that her credentials were undeniable. Lucky that the system for once had worked as it should. But luck was not good enough. Systems that only worked when someone was lucky were not systems at all. They were lotteries, dispensing justice to the fortunate and injustice to everyone else. That was why she kept pushing. Why she testified and advocated and implemented reforms that her predecessors had dismissed as unnecessary. Why she took calls from victims' families and attended memorial services and never ever let herself forget what it felt like to stand on a street corner with her hands behind her back, waiting to see if she would survive the encounter. Some days the progress felt impossibly slow. Some days the setbacks overwhelmed the advances. Some days she wondered if anything she did would make a lasting difference. But then she would remember Patricia Holloway raising her phone. Remember Jamal Crawford in his law school graduation gown. Remember Margaret Bell saying maybe now he can rest. And she would remember that change did not happen all at once. It happened in moments, in choices, in the accumulated weight of people who refused to accept that things had to stay the way they were. She reached her car, loaded her groceries into the back, and paused for a moment to look at the street where everything had changed. Then she drove home. Back to her ordinary life, to prepare for another day of extraordinary work. The fight was not over. It never would be. But it was a fight worth having. And Denise Mitchell had never been afraid of a fight. If this story moved you, if it made you think about justice and accountability and the long road we still have to travel, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories like this one. Stories that matter. Stories that challenge. Stories that remind us all that one moment of courage can change everything.